Before you spread that honey on your toast, you need to know this. Most honey sold in UK supermarkets has never seen the inside of a British beehive. It's been shipped from thousands of miles away, heated to extreme temperatures, filtered until it's barely recognizable as honey, and blended with syrups you'd never expect. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how factory honey is made, why it's nothing like what bees actually produce, and which brands you should avoid. Let's start with what real honey actually is, then expose what's really happening in these factories. What real honey actually is. Real honey is simple, but the process bees use to create it is absolutely remarkable. Bees collect nectar from flowers, storing it in a special honey stomach separate from their digestive stomach. A single bee visits between 50 and 100 flowers during each foraging trip, collecting tiny amounts of nectar that weigh less than the bee itself. When the forager bee returns to the hive, she passes the nectar to house bees through a process called trophallaxis, which is mouth-to-mouth transfer. During this transfer, enzymes from the bee's saliva start breaking down the complex sugars in the nectar into simpler sugars like glucose and fructose. This enzymatic process is crucial because it's what transforms flower nectar into actual honey. The house bees then deposit this enzyme-rich nectar into hexagonal wax cells. But at this stage, the nectar still contains 60 to 80% water, far too much to be stable honey. This is where the real magic happens. Thousands of worker bees position themselves throughout the hive and fan their wings in coordinated shifts, creating airflow that evaporates the excess moisture. This process can take several days of constant work. The bees monitor the moisture content instinctively, and when it drops to around 18% or less, they know the honey is ready. At this moisture level, honey becomes inhospitable to bacteria and yeast, which is why properly made honey never spoils. Archaeologists have found 3,000-year-old honey in Egyptian tombs that's still perfectly edible. Once the moisture content is right, the bees seal each cell with a thin wax cap called a capping. This creates an airtight seal that preserves the honey indefinitely. A healthy hive can produce anywhere from 30 to 60 pounds of surplus honey in a good year, which is what beekeepers harvest. The bees keep plenty for themselves to survive the winter when flowers aren't blooming. Real honey contains far more than just sugars and water. Each teaspoon contains pollen grains from the specific flowers the bees visited, creating a fingerprint that identifies the honey's geographic and botanical origin. British wildflower honey tastes completely different from Spanish orange blossom honey or New Zealand manuka honey because the pollen and nectar sources are unique. The enzymes are equally important. Diastase helps break down starches. Invertase converts sucrose into glucose and fructose. Glucose oxidase produces hydrogen peroxide, giving honey its natural antibacterial properties. These enzymes are living compounds that remain active in raw honey, providing genuine health benefits. Real honey also contains trace amounts of vitamins, including B vitamins and vitamin C, minerals like calcium, iron, zinc, potassium and magnesium, antioxidants, including flavonoids and phenolic acids, amino acids and organic acids that give honey its characteristic pH level of 3.2 to 4.5. The flavor profile varies dramatically depending on the nectar source. Heather honey from Scottish moorlands has a thick, jelly-like texture and intense flavor. Lavender honey from southern England is delicate and floral. Buckwheat honey is dark, rich, and almost malty. Acacia honey is pale and mild. This diversity is one of honey's most beautiful characteristics. A commercial beekeeper with 40 years of experience told me, when you harvest honey properly, you're just removing it from the hive and jarring it. That's the entire process. You uncap the sealed cells, spin the frames in an extractor to fling the honey out using centrifugal force, strain it through a coarse mesh to remove wax chunks and the occasional bee part, and pour it into jars. That's it. The whole process from hive to jar can happen in a single afternoon. If you're doing anything more than that, heating it, filtering it through fine filters, blending it with honey from other sources, you're not making honey anymore. You're processing it into something else entirely. Traditional beekeepers use equipment that hasn't changed much in over a century. A manual or electric extractor, a simple strainer, and clean jars. The honey that comes out is cloudy with pollen, contains all the original enzymes and beneficial compounds, and will crystallize naturally within weeks or months depending on its glucose content. This crystallization is actually a sign of quality, not a defect, because it proves the honey hasn't been overheated or ultra-filtered. But that's not how factory honey works. Not even close. What happens in industrial honey processing facilities bears almost no resemblance to what bees create in the hive. The imported honey reality. Here's the uncomfortable truth that the honey industry doesn't want you to know. The UK produces around 6,000 tons of honey per year from roughly 270,000 hives managed by approximately 44,000 beekeepers. That sounds like a lot until you realise we consume over 40,000 tons annually. That means we're importing roughly 34,000 tons every single year just to meet demand. That's 85% of all honey consumed in Britain coming from overseas. This massive import dependency has created a supply chain that prioritises volume and price over quality. The imported honey comes primarily from China, which supplies nearly half of all honey consumed globally, producing approximately 450,000 tons per year. Turkey exports roughly 100,000 tons annually. Argentina, Mexico, Ukraine, India, and Vietnam are other major sources. Together, these countries flood the global market with cheap honey that's often of questionable quality. The honey arrives in the UK in massive steel drums weighing 300 kilograms each. These drums are stacked in shipping containers, with each container holding dozens of drums representing several tons of honey. The drums sit in ports for days or weeks during customs clearance, often in uncontrolled temperatures that can reach extreme highs or lows depending on the season. Then, it's been processed and filtered to the point where you can barely detect any pollen under a microscope. Some batches we've tested contain fewer than 5 pollen grains per 10 grams of honey, when natural honey should contain thousands. Some of it has been adulterated with rice syrup or corn syrup before it even leaves the origin country, and we only catch it if we do expensive advanced testing. The imported honey sits in warehouses for months, sometimes over a year before it gets processed. During this storage period, it crystallizes naturally because real honey always crystallizes eventually. The speed of crystallization depends on the glucose to fructose ratio. Honey high in glucose, like oilseed rape honey, crystallizes within weeks. Honey high in fructose, like acacia honey, stays liquid for months. But eventually, all real honey forms crystals. But British consumers don't want crystallized honey. Market research shows that over 70% of shoppers prefer clear, golden, runny honey that pours smoothly and spreads easily. Crystallized honey is seen as old, spoiled, or poor quality, even though the opposite is true. This consumer preference drives everything that happens next in the factory. So the factories have to reverse that crystallization, and that's where the problems begin. The heating process. Factory honey processing starts with heating, and this is where much of the damage happens. The crystallized honey from those 300 kilogram drums needs to be liquefied so it gets pumped into massive heating tanks. The honey is heated to temperatures between 45 and 77 degrees Celsius. Some factories go even higher, up to 80 or 90 degrees, because higher temperatures work faster and time is money. Here's the problem. Honey contains delicate enzymes, particularly diastase and invertase, that provide health benefits. These enzymes are destroyed at temperatures above 40 degrees Celsius. The higher the temperature, the more damage occurs. A food scientist told me, when you heat honey above 60 degrees, you're killing everything that makes honey special. The enzymes die. The beneficial compounds break down. You're left with sugar syrup. That happens to have come from bees originally. The heating also affects the flavour. Overheated honey develops a burnt, caramelized taste. To mask this, factories blend it with honey from multiple sources, averaging out the flavour profile into something generic and inoffensive. The heating process can take several hours. The honey is held at high temperatures while being pumped through heating coils and stirred constantly to ensure even heating throughout the batch. Some factories use flash heating, which exposes the honey to extreme temperatures for shorter periods, but the damage is similar. But heating is only the first assault on honey's natural properties. Let's talk about the next process, the ultrafiltration process. After heating, the honey goes through filtration, not the gentle straining that beekeepers do to remove wax and bee parts. We're talking about ultrafiltration that strips out almost everything except sugar and water. The honey is forced through extremely fine filters under pressure. These filters have pores so small that they remove pollen grains, which are the fingerprints that identify where honey came from. A honey industry insider revealed, ultrafiltration serves two purposes. First, it prevents crystallization because removing pollen means there are fewer nucleation points for crystals to form. Second, and more importantly, it makes the honey's origin untraceable. If you remove all the pollen, laboratory tests can't determine which country or even which continent the honey came from. This matters because some countries have terrible reputations for honey adulteration. Chinese honey has been caught mixed with rice syrup, corn syrup, and other sweeteners. By removing the pollen, factories can blend cheap, questionable honey from suspect sources with legitimate honey, and nobody can prove where it actually came from. The European Union has specific rules stating that honey with pollen removed cannot legally be called honey. But enforcement is inconsistent, and plenty of ultra-filtered honey still reaches UK shelves labelled as pure honey. The filtration also removes beneficial compounds. Propolis, which has antibacterial properties, gets filtered out. Tiny amounts of royal jelly, bee pollen, and other hive products that contribute to honey's health benefits disappear. What's left is a clear, golden liquid that looks beautiful in the jar but has been stripped of almost everything that made it honey in the first place. And once the honey has been stripped of its identity through ultrafiltration, the blending begins. The blending process. Very rarely does the honey in your jar come from a single source. Factory honey is blended from dozens, sometimes hundreds of different batches from different countries. The blending happens in massive steel tanks that can hold several tons of honey. Different honeys are pumped in and mixed together, creating a standardized product that tastes the same year-round regardless of seasonal variations. A former factory worker told me, we'd blend honey from 6 or 7 different countries in one batch. Chinese honey, Turkish honey, Mexican honey, whatever was cheapest that month. The goal was to hit a specific flavor profile and price point. If the Chinese honey was of particularly bad quality, we'd use less of it and more from Argentina. If Turkish prices were low, we'd increase that percentage. The blending allows factories to maintain consistent taste and appearance while using whatever sources are most economical at any given time. It also allows them to stretch expensive honey with cheaper alternatives. Some factories add small amounts of UK honey to their blends so they can put "contains UK honey" on the label. They might use 5% British honey mixed with 95% imported honey, but consumers see UK honey and assume they're supporting local beekeepers. The blending tanks use powerful agitators to ensure thorough mixing. The honey is tested for moisture content, sugar levels, and viscosity. If the blend is too thick, water is added. If it's too thin, thicker honey is blended in until the consistency is perfect. But blending different honeys is just the beginning of what gets mixed into those jars. The additives nobody talks about. Here's something that will shock you. Some factory honey contains additives that never appear on the label. High fructose corn syrup or rice syrup can be mixed into honey, and if it's done cleverly, standard tests won't detect it. The syrups are made to match honey's sugar ratios, fooling basic laboratory analysis. A food fraud investigator explained, honey adulteration is a billion-pound industry globally. Some operations are incredibly sophisticated, using enzymes to break down syrups in ways that mimic honey's natural sugar profile. Unless you use very advanced testing like nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy, you won't catch it. Thickening agents sometimes get added to give honey the right viscosity. Modified starches or gums can make watery honey appear properly thick without actually being high-quality honey. Coloring agents are occasionally used to adjust the color. Honey from certain sources is too pale or too dark for consumer preferences, so factories add caramel coloring to hit that perfect golden shade. Preservatives aren't necessary because real honey is naturally antibacterial and never spoils, but some factories add them anyway to extend shelf life beyond what's natural. The worst part is that UK labelling laws have loopholes. If an additive is present below a certain threshold, it doesn't need to be declared. If it's considered a processing aid rather than an ingredient, it doesn't go on the label. And if adulteration wasn't enough, there's another process that destroys what little goodness remains: the pasteurization problem. Many factories pasteurize their honey, heating it to even higher temperatures than the initial liquefaction process. Pasteurization typically involves heating to 71 degrees Celsius or higher for several minutes. The claimed reason is food safety, preventing fermentation if the honey has too much moisture. But real honey with proper moisture content below 18% never ferments. It's one of the only foods that never goes bad. Honey found in ancient Egyptian tombs was still perfectly edible after 3,000 years because properly made honey is eternally shelf-stable. If honey needs pasteurization to prevent fermentation, that's actually an admission that the honey was harvested prematurely with excessive moisture content. Responsible beekeepers only harvest capped honey cells, which guarantees proper moisture levels. The real reason is shelf life and appearance. Pasteurized honey stays liquid longer, sometimes for years instead of months. It takes far longer to crystallize and looks perfect on supermarket shelves for extended periods. A nutritionist analyzed pasteurized versus raw honey for me. She tested samples from 5 major UK supermarket brands and compared them to raw honey from 3 local beekeepers. She found pasteurized honey has negligible enzyme activity compared to raw honey. When I tested for diastase activity, the pasteurized samples showed levels below 3, with some as low as 0.5. Raw honey samples ranged from 15 to 35. The antioxidant levels were reduced by 60 to 80%. The antimicrobial properties were diminished by about 70%. The hydroxymethyl furfural content, which indicates heat damage, was 15 to 40 times higher. You're basically eating expensive sugar syrup with a bit of honey flavor. All the health benefits have been cooked out. The pasteurization process uses flash heating systems that expose honey to extreme temperatures for short bursts. Some factories use continuous flow systems where honey is pumped through heated tubes at high speed, reaching 75 or 80 degrees for just 15 to 30 seconds. This achieves the goal of killing any yeast cells that might cause fermentation, while theoretically reducing damage to the honey. But research shows that even flash pasteurization destroys significant amounts of the beneficial compounds. Studies found that just 30 seconds at 78 degrees reduced enzyme activity by over 60%, decreased antioxidant capacity by 45%, and increased heat damage markers by 300%. Medical-grade honey used for wound treatment is never pasteurized for exactly this reason. Products like MediHoney rely on antibacterial properties that pasteurization would destroy. These medical products use raw honey sterilized through gamma irradiation, which kills bacteria without heating the honey. But pasteurization isn't the only way factories manipulate honey's natural state to meet consumer expectations. The creaming process. Some honey is deliberately crystallized in a controlled way to create creamed honey or set honey. This isn't necessarily bad, but the way factories do it often involves more processing. The process was invented in Canada in the 1930s. It controls honey's natural crystallization, creating a smooth, spreadable product instead of coarse, grainy crystals. The honey is cooled rapidly while being stirred constantly. This creates fine crystals instead of large, gritty ones. Seed crystals from previous batches are sometimes added to start the crystallization process, typically about 10% seed crystals to 90% liquid honey. The honey is then stored at specific temperatures, usually around 14 degrees Celsius, which is the optimal temperature for fine crystal formation. It's stirred regularly to break up larger crystals and maintain a smooth, spreadable texture. The process takes several days of careful temperature control and stirring. Some factories add small amounts of other honeys with specific crystallization properties to adjust the final texture. When done properly, creamed honey is a premium product with a smooth, butter-like texture that spreads beautifully. The flavor is often more intense than liquid honey because the crystallized structure holds aromatic compounds more effectively. Creamed honey isn't necessarily lower quality than liquid honey if it's done properly, but many factories use this process to disguise poor quality honey. By crystallizing it, they hide color variations, inconsistent texture, and other quality issues that would be obvious in liquid honey. Some factories cream honey that's already started crystallizing naturally during storage, making irregular grainy crystals appear intentional. Others use honey that failed quality checks for liquid honey packaging and cream it to make defects less noticeable. The creaming process can also disguise blending. If a factory blends high-quality honey with cheaper honey, the differences might be obvious in liquid form, but cream them together and the uniform texture makes it harder to detect. Some producers add thickening agents like cornstarch to make poorly crystallized honey appear properly creamed. These additions aren't legal, but testing has found them in some budget products. Once the honey has been processed into the perfect consistency, whether liquid or creamed, it's ready for the final stage, where marketing takes over from manufacturing. The jarring and labeling deception. Finally, the processed honey gets pumped into jars on high-speed filling lines. The jars zoom along conveyor belts, get filled with precise amounts of honey, sealed with lids, and labeled. This is where the marketing deception reaches its peak. The labels feature images of bees, flowers, and countryside scenes. Words like pure, natural, and 100% honey appear prominently. But none of that tells you the honey has been heated, ultra-filtered, blended from multiple countries, possibly adulterated, and stripped of everything that made it beneficial. A consumer rights advocate told me the labeling is designed to mislead. Companies know consumers want local, natural honey, so they use imagery and language that suggests that while selling industrially processed imported honey, it's legal deception. The country of origin labeling is particularly misleading. If honey comes from multiple countries, the label just says blend of EU and non-EU honeys. This could mean literally anywhere in the world. You have no idea if it's from reputable sources or countries known for adulteration. Some jars say product of UK or packed in UK, which makes consumers think it's British honey. But those phrases only mean it was processed or jarred in Britain. The honey itself came from overseas. The jars then get packed into boxes, stacked on pallets, and shipped to supermarket distribution centres. From there, they go to shops where unsuspecting consumers grab them, thinking they're buying pure natural honey. Behind these pretty labels and misleading claims lies an industry operating at a scale most people can't imagine. The numbers. That shock. Let's talk about the scale of this operation. The UK honey market is worth over £150 million annually. The major honey factories process thousands of tons every year. A single large factory can process over 10,000 tons of honey annually. That's 10 million kilograms running through heating tanks, filters, and blending equipment. The factories operate around the clock during peak seasons, running multiple production lines simultaneously. Some can fill and label up to 10,000 jars per hour. The profit margins are substantial. Imported honey costs as little as £2 per kilogram when bought in bulk. After processing, it's jarred and sold for £8 to £15 per kilogram retail. Meanwhile, British beekeepers struggle to compete. Local, raw honey costs more to produce. Because beekeepers have higher labour costs, operate at smaller scale and don't use shortcuts. They're selling genuine honey for fair prices, but consumers often choose cheaper factory honey without realising what they're actually buying. These shocking numbers reveal an industry built on volume and profit, not quality, which is why you need to completely change how you buy honey. What you should do instead. Stop buying factory-processed honey immediately. Check the label for the country of origin. If it says blend of EU and non-EU honeys, put it back. That's code for we mix cheap honey from everywhere and we're not telling you where. Look for honey from a single named country. British honey is best because you're supporting local beekeepers and getting honey that hasn't travelled thousands of miles. Better yet, buy directly from local beekeepers at farmers markets or farm shops. This honey is raw, unfiltered and unheated. It crystallizes naturally, which is a good sign, not a defect. Real honey crystallizes. If your honey has been sitting in the cupboard for a year and it's still perfectly liquid, that's suspicious. Either it's been heavily processed or it's not pure honey. Price is an indicator. If honey is suspiciously cheap, there's a reason. Real honey costs more because it's expensive to produce properly. Beekeepers have to maintain hives, extract honey carefully, and jar it by hand. That labor has value. Learn to identify real honey. It should have some cloudiness from pollen and propolis. The flavor should vary between jars because different flowers bloom at different times. It should crystallize within a few months of opening. If you want liquid honey, just warm, crystallized honey gently. Put the jar in warm water, not boiling, and let it liquefy naturally. This preserves the enzymes and beneficial compounds while giving you the texture you want. Support beekeepers who are transparent about their methods. Ask questions. Where do they keep their hives? When was the honey harvested? How is it processed? Good beekeepers are proud to answer because they have nothing to hide. Stop falling for marketing. Pretty labels with bees and flowers mean nothing. Pure and natural are meaningless terms when the honey has been heated to 80 degrees and ultra-filtered. Read ingredient lists. It should say one thing: honey. If it lists anything else, it's been adulterated. Have you been buying factory honey thinking it was natural? Are you shocked by how it's actually made? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this opened your eyes to what's really in that jar, share it with everyone who eats honey. They deserve to know the truth about what they're spreading on their toast every morning.